The cold seeped through the bus window and into my fingertip as I traced another heart onto the fogged glass, watching the shape appear like a ghost against the darkness outside. My breath had turned the window into a canvas, the way it always did on nights like this, nights when my mind would not settle and my body ached from another double shift at the diner. The bus lurched forward, nearly empty at this hour, just me and a handful of strangers too tired or too desperate to own cars. I drew another heart, smaller this time, nested inside the first. It was a stupid habit, something I had done since I was a child riding the school bus, anxious about tests or friendships, or all the small cruelties of growing up. Now I was 26, and still drawing hearts on foggy windows like some lovesick teenager. Except I was not lovesick, just tired, just lonely in a way that felt like a permanent ache in my chest. The city blurred past, streetlights smearing into golden streaks. I started to pull my hand away when I saw it. Another heart. Right behind mine on the glass, drawn from the other side, from inside the bus. My pulse stuttered. I turned slowly, my neck stiff with sudden tension, and met the eyes of a man sitting in the row behind me. Dark eyes, unblinking, fixed on mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. He was beautiful in a dangerous way, sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked carved from stone, his black coat expensive enough that I could tell even in the dim bus lighting. Cashmere, maybe. Something that cost more than I made in a month. He did not smile, did not look away, just watched me with a focus that felt like a physical touch, like he could see beneath my skin to all the anxious, fragile parts I kept hidden. I should have looked away first, should have turned back to the window, pretended I had not seen, pretended he had not just answered my absent doodle with one of his own. But I could not move. The air between us felt charged, electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Who draws hearts back at a stranger on a bus? Who looks at someone like that, like they already know you, like they have been searching for you? My hands trembled in my lap. I forced myself to break eye contact, to turn back toward the front of the bus, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. The bus groaned to a stop at the next intersection. I could feel him still watching me, feel the weight of his gaze on the back of my neck. I did not dare look at the window again, did not dare see if he had drawn anything else. When my stop finally came, I stood on shaking legs and moved toward the door, not looking back, not giving him the satisfaction. But as I stepped down onto the sidewalk and the bus pulled away, I turned. He was watching me through the window, his hand lifted slowly, one finger pressed to the glass, drawing another heart. I told myself I would not think about him. All through my shift the next day, I scrubbed tables and poured coffee and smiled at customers while my mind circled back to those dark eyes, that impossible heart drawn on glass. It meant nothing. A coincidence. A stranger with too much time and a weird sense of humor. By the time I boarded the bus that night, I had almost convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing, that exhaustion and loneliness had conjured some romantic fantasy out of nothing. But he was there. Same seat, same dark coat, same unnerving stillness. My stomach dropped. He was not looking at me, not yet. His gaze focused on something out the window. But I knew the moment I sat down that he would turn, that he had been waiting. I chose a seat 3 rows ahead this time, closer to the driver, closer to other people, even though there were only 4 of us on the bus. My hands were shaking again. I shoved them into my jacket pockets and stared straight ahead, refusing to look back, refusing to give him the satisfaction. The bus rumbled forward. I counted stops in my head. 8 more until mine. I could do this. Then I felt him move, the subtle shift of weight, the whisper of expensive fabric. He sat down beside me, not across the aisle, not behind, right next to me on a nearly empty bus, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something dark and woody and far too intimate for a stranger. My breath caught. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to stand up, to get away, but my body would not cooperate. I turned my head slowly, met his eyes, and the impact was just as devastating as the night before. He smiled. Barely. Just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth. "Dante," he said. His voice was smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that expected to be listened to. "It is Mira, right?" I stared at him. "How do you know my name?" He tilted his head slightly, considering. "Your name tag. Last night. You were still wearing it." I looked down at my chest instinctively. The tag was gone now, back in my locker at the diner. My heart hammered. "You have been following me." A statement, not a question. "I have been watching you," he corrected, as if there were some meaningful difference. His gaze dropped to my hands, still hidden in my pockets. "You draw hearts when you are anxious. Why?" I should have stood up, should have screamed, should have done anything except sit there like prey pinned under a predator's stare. Instead, I found myself answering. Old habit. He nodded slowly, like I had just confirmed something he already knew. "Do you have someone? Someone who deserves those hearts?" The question felt too personal, too intimate. "No, not anymore. Not ever, really. Why does it matter?" "It matters." His eyes held mine, and I saw something flicker there, something almost like regret. "You should be more careful, Mira. This city is not kind to women who ride buses alone at night." I felt anger flare, hot and defensive. "I have been riding this bus for 2 years. I can take care of myself. Can you?" The words were soft, but they landed like a threat. My stop was next. I stood abruptly, pushing past him into the aisle. He did not try to stop me, but as I moved toward the door, he spoke again. "I will see you tomorrow, Mira." I did not look back. He was outside the diner the next morning. I spotted him through the window while refilling the coffee station, standing across the street beneath the awning of a closed bookstore, hands in the pockets of that same black coat, his gaze fixed on the diner entrance like he had all the time in the world. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the coffee pot. By the time my shift ended at 3, he was gone, but the unease remained, crawling under my skin like something alive. I told myself I was being paranoid. The city was full of people. Coincidences happened. Except he was at the bus stop that evening, leaning against the shelter with his phone in his hand, and when I walked past him to board the bus, he followed. I did not sit. I stood near the driver, gripping the pole, my knuckles white. He took a seat in the middle, his eyes never leaving me. I got off 2 stops early and walked the rest of the way home, my pace quick, my heart racing. When I glanced back, he was not there, and I felt a confusing mix of relief and disappointment. The next day he was at the corner store where I bought milk and bread on my way home from work. He was in the aisle behind me, examining a bottle of wine with the kind of casual focus that felt performative, like he wanted me to know he was there. I slammed my basket down on the counter and turned to face him, my fear finally twisting into anger. "Why are you following me?" He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "Because you need to be followed." "What the hell does that mean?" I crossed my arms, trying to look braver than I felt. People were staring now, the cashier's hand hovering over the register. Dante walked toward me with that same unsettling calm, stopping just close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "It means you are in danger, Mira, whether you believe it or not." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "If I am in danger, it is from you. You are the one stalking me." "From me?" He tilted his head slightly, something almost like amusement flickering across his face. "No. I am the only reason you are still safe." My chest tightened. This is insane. I do not know you. I do not owe you anything. Leave me alone. "I cannot do that." "Why not?" "Because I do not want to watch you disappear." His voice dropped lower, quiet enough that only I could hear. And you will, if I walk away. The certainty in his tone chilled me. I stepped back, shaking my head. Stay away from me, Dante, or I will call the police. He smiled then, just barely, and it was the saddest smile I had ever seen. The police cannot help you with this, but I can. I left without buying anything, my legs unsteady as I pushed through the door and out into the cold. I walked 6 blocks before I realized I was crying. When I finally looked back, he was standing on the corner, watching me go, and he did not follow. I was 2 blocks from the diner when the man stepped out from between parked cars and into my path. He was tall, thin in a wiry way that suggested contained energy, and his smile did not reach his eyes. Mira, right? His voice was sandpaper and oil. I froze, my bag clutched against my chest. Who are you? What do you want? Just a conversation. He moved closer, hands raised like he was calming a skittish animal. About your old man. My blood turned cold. My father had been dead for 3 years, and I had spent those years trying to forget the chaos he left behind, the bottles and the broken promises, and the collectors who came knocking in those final months. I do not know what you are talking about. I tried to step around him, but he mirrored my movement, blocking me again. See, I think you do. Or maybe you do not, which would be unfortunate for both of us. He owed money, sweetheart. A lot of it. And debts do not die just because the debtor does. I do not have any money. My voice shook. Whatever he owed, it has nothing to do with me. He laughed, low and mean. That is not how this works. You are his daughter. That makes you responsible. You have until the end of the week to come up with 50,000, or we start taking payment in other ways. His gaze dragged down my body, slow and deliberate, and nausea rolled through me. I opened my mouth to scream, to run, to do anything, but then a hand landed on the man's shoulder, firm and unyielding, and Dante was there. I suggest you walk away. Now. His voice was quiet, laced with something so dark and absolute that the air itself seemed to thicken. The man turned, his sneer faltering the moment he saw Dante's face. Whatever bravado he had carried evaporated. He stepped back, hands raised in surrender. I did not know she was under protection. I am just doing my job. Your job is finished. Dante did not raise his voice, did not move, but the threat in his stillness was unmistakable. If I see you near her again, it will be the last thing you do. Understood? The man nodded once, quick and jerky, and then he was gone, disappearing into the street like a shadow swallowed by daylight. I stood there shaking, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Dante turned to me, his expression unreadable. Are you hurt? No, I do not think so. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. What just happened? What he said? The debt? Is it real? Yes. His gaze held mine, steady and grim. And it is worse than you know. Come with me, I will take you home. I should have refused. Should have demanded answers right there on the street. But my legs were weak and my mind was spinning, and when he gestured toward a sleek black car parked at the curb, I followed. The car smelled like leather and something expensive I could not name, and the silence between us felt heavier than stone. Dante drove with the kind of ease that suggested he had done this 1,000 times, his hands steady on the wheel, his jaw tight. I stared out the window at the city sliding past, the lights blurring into streaks, my mind racing too fast to catch a single coherent thought. When we pulled up in front of my building, he turned off the engine, but made no move to let me out. I need you to tell me everything. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Who were those people? What did my father do? He was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the dark street ahead. 3 years ago, your father borrowed a significant amount of money from a loan operation run by people who do not forgive or forget. He was gambling, trying to win back what he had already lost, and it spiraled. When he died, the debt should have died with him, but it was sold to a new player. Someone who sees opportunity in collecting old debts, especially ones tied to leverage. Leverage. The word tasted bitter. You mean me? Yes. He turned to face me then, and the intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. The man who approached you tonight works for them. They will keep coming, Mira. They will pressure you, threaten you, and if you do not pay, they will use you in other ways. Fear coiled tight in my chest. I do not have 50,000. I do not have anything. I know. I can protect you. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. But you have to trust me. I laughed, sharp and broken. Trust you? I do not even know you. You have been stalking me for days, and now you are telling me my dead father has dragged me into something I cannot escape. Why should I trust you? Because I am the only one offering you a way out. He leaned closer, and I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his eyes searched mine like he was trying to read something written beneath my skin. I have resources, connections. I can make this go away, but not if you fight me. I shook my head, my hands balling into fists in my lap. I can handle this myself. I will find a way to pay them, or I will go to the police. The police cannot touch these people, Mira. And you cannot pay a debt that keeps growing. They will bleed you dry and then take you anyway. Then what do you want from me? What do you get out of this? Nothing. His answer was immediate, and something flickered across his face, something almost like pain. I get nothing except knowing you are safe. I stared at him, trying to find the lie, the angle, the hidden agenda, but all I saw was a man who looked at me like I mattered, like my survival was worth something to him, and I did not understand why. I need to think. I reached for the door handle. I cannot just hand my life over to you because you say I should. He did not stop me, but his voice followed me out into the cold. You have 48 hours, Mira. After that, they will escalate, and I will not be able to stop what happens next. I went to work the next morning with shadows under my eyes and a knot in my stomach that would not loosen. The diner smelled like coffee and bacon grease, familiar and grounding, but I could not shake the feeling of being watched. Every time the door chimed, I flinched. Every time a customer lingered too long near the counter, my pulse jumped. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Dante had exaggerated the danger to manipulate me into depending on him, but the memory of that man's cold smile and the way he had looked at me made my skin crawl. During my break, I pulled out my phone and searched for anything I could find about my father's last years. I had avoided this before, too angry and hurt to care about the mess he left behind. But now I needed answers. I found mentions of him in old gambling forums, debts listed in public records, and a few threads on obscure sites discussing loan sharks operating in the city. The numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands, maybe more. I felt sick. How had he hidden this from me? How had I not known? But I had known, in a way. I had known he was drinking more, disappearing for days, coming home with bruises and excuses. I just had not wanted to see it. The afternoon shift dragged. I dropped plates twice, burned myself on the coffee pot. My manager asked if I was feeling all right, and I lied and said I was fine. At 4, a regular named Sam, an older man who always ordered pie and black coffee, leaned across the counter and spoke so quietly I almost missed it. You should be careful, Mira. There have been men asking about you. Not the kind you want attention from. My blood went cold. What men? When? A few days ago. They came in here, showed your picture around, asked where you lived, where you went after work. I did not tell them anything, but others might have. His eyes were kind, but worried. I do not know what you are mixed up in, but you should watch yourself. I thanked him, my voice barely above a whisper, and he left a 20 on a $7 check. The rest of my shift passed in a haze of fear. I kept glancing at the windows, the door, expecting to see a face I recognized or a shadow that did not belong. By the time I clocked out, dusk had settled over the city, and the streets felt hostile, every alley a potential threat. I thought about calling Dante. His number was still in my phone from when he had insisted I take it the night before. But calling him felt like surrender, like admitting I could not handle my own life, and I was not ready for that. Not yet. I walked home the long way, avoiding the usual shortcuts, checking over my shoulder every few steps. The sensation of being followed clung to me like smoke, invisible but suffocating. When I finally reached my building, I stood outside for a long moment, staring up at my window on the third floor, trying to convince myself I was safe. But I was not. I knew I was not. And the worst part was, I had no idea what to do about it. I knew something was wrong the moment I opened the door to my apartment. The air felt different, displaced, like someone had disturbed the stillness I had left behind that morning. My hand froze on the doorknob. The lock had not been forced, but the door had swung open too easily, and when I stepped inside, my stomach dropped. Drawers were pulled open, cushions on the couch were askew. My small bookshelf had been rifled through, books lying spine up on the floor. Nothing looked smashed or destroyed, but everything had been touched, moved, violated. I stood in the doorway, unable to move, my breath coming in short gasps. They had been here, in my space, my sanctuary. I walked further in, my legs shaking, and saw my bedroom door ajar. The closet had been opened, clothes pulled from hangers. My mattress shifted off the frame, and on my mirror, written in something dark that looked like marker, were 4 words that made my blood turn to ice. Pay or disappear. Choose. I staggered back, my hand flying to my mouth, and the sob that escaped me sounded foreign. Animal. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and pulled up Dante's number. I did not think. I did not hesitate. I just pressed call. He answered on the first ring. Mira. His voice was sharp, alert. What happened? They were in my apartment. My voice cracked. They broke in. They left a message. I cannot stay here. I cannot breathe. Where are you right now? Inside? Yes. I am inside. Get out. Now. Do not touch anything else. Go to the hallway and wait for me. I am 10 minutes away. I did what he said, stumbling out into the hallway, my back pressed against the wall, my whole body shaking so hard I thought I might fall apart. Other tenants walked past, glancing at me with concern, but I could not speak, could not explain. All I could do was wait. He arrived in 8 minutes. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, fast and purposeful, and then he was there, his coat billowing behind him, his face a mask of controlled fury. He reached me and his hands came up to grip my shoulders, his eyes scanning my face, my body, checking for injuries. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? No. I shook my head. I was not here. I just got home and they had already been inside. Show me. I led him into the apartment, and he moved through the space like a predator, his gaze taking in every detail, every disturbance. He stopped in front of the mirror and stared at the message, his jaw tightening, a muscle twitching beneath the skin. Then he turned to me, and his voice was quiet, deadly. You cannot stay here. Pack a bag. Essentials only. You are coming with me. I did not argue. I did not have the strength. I grabbed a duffel from the closet and shoved in clothes, toiletries, my laptop, anything I thought I might need. My hands were still shaking. Dante stood in the doorway, watching, his presence a solid wall between me and whatever horror had invaded my life. When I finished, he took the bag from me and guided me out with a hand on the small of my back. We descended to the street where a black car waited, engine running. He opened the door for me and I slid inside, numb and terrified. The city blurred past as we drove, and I did not ask where we were going. I already knew. I was going into his world now, and there was no turning back. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt endless, a smooth ascent that carried me higher and higher above the city I knew, above the life I recognized, into something foreign and overwhelming. When the doors opened directly into his apartment, I stepped out onto marble floors that gleamed like dark water, and my breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the space, offering a view of the city that made me feel like I was floating, suspended between earth and sky. The furniture was leather and steel, modern and expensive, the kind of pieces I had only seen in magazines. Art hung on the walls, abstract and bold, and a chandelier of crystalline geometric shapes cast fractured light across the room. Everything was clean, controlled, perfect. It felt like stepping into the den of something powerful and predatory, and I was acutely aware of how small I was in this space, how out of place. Dante set my duffel down near a hallway and gestured toward it. Guest room is the second door on the right. Private bathroom. You will have everything you need. If you want anything else, tell me. His voice was calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw remained tight. I stood there, clutching my phone like a lifeline, and the enormity of what had just happened crashed over me. I was in a stranger's home, a man I barely knew, because my life had been turned inside out by debts I never incurred and threats I did not understand. I turned to face him, and my voice came out sharper than I intended. Who are you really? You say you can protect me, but I do not even know what that means. What are you, Dante? He met my gaze, and for a moment I thought he might deflect again, give me another half-truth. But then he exhaled and walked to the windows, his back to me, his silhouette dark against the city lights. I run an organization, one that operates outside the law. I handle disputes, territories, transactions that do not involve banks or courts. People come to me when they need problems solved quietly. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were describing a business, which I supposed it was, in a way. Your father borrowed money from people connected to my world. That debt changed hands multiple times, and now it belongs to someone who wants to use it as leverage against me. This is not really about you, Mira. It is about power, territory, and the message it sends if I allow someone under my protection to be harmed. The words settled over me like a weight. Protection. As if I had asked for it, as if I had any choice. And what does that make me? I asked, my voice hollow. A pawn? He turned, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my pulse stutter. No, you are not a pawn. You are someone I will not let them take. There was something raw in his voice, something that went beyond strategy or reputation. It unnerved me and steadied me at the same time. I wanted to argue, to rage against the unfairness of it all, but exhaustion pulled at my limbs and my mind felt fractured. I nodded slowly, unable to find more words, and he watched me for another long moment before stepping aside. Get some rest. We will figure this out. I walked down the hallway, my legs heavy, and closed the door to the guest room behind me, leaning against it as the reality of my new prison sank in. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, and for a disorienting moment I forgot where I was. Then the events of the previous night crashed back, and I sat up in the enormous bed, my heart pounding. The guest room was pristine, untouched, like a hotel suite designed for someone who mattered more than I did. I climbed out of bed and padded to the door, pressing my ear against it, listening for sounds of life beyond. Voices, low and male, drifted from somewhere in the penthouse. I pulled on the same clothes from yesterday and ventured out, following the voices to a sprawling kitchen where Dante stood with another man, both of them leaning over a tablet on the counter. They stopped talking the moment I appeared. Dante's eyes found mine and he straightened. You slept. That is good. His tone was neutral, but I caught the flicker of concern underneath. The other man nodded at me and left without a word, and suddenly it was just the two of us in that cavernous space. I crossed my arms, feeling exposed in the bright morning light. So what now? I stay here like a prisoner until you decide it is safe? He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. You are not a prisoner. You are protected. There is a difference. Is there? Because I cannot leave, can I? Not without your permission. Not without risking my life. His jaw tightened. If you leave, you will be dead within 24 hours. So no, Mira, you cannot leave. Not yet. The bluntness of it stung, but I refused to back down. I did not ask for this. I did not ask for you to swoop in and take over my life. I can handle my own problems. You were handling it so well last night. His voice turned sharp, cutting. Standing in your destroyed apartment, shaking so hard you could barely hold your phone. That is handling it? My anger flared, hot and desperate. What do you want from me, Dante? Gratitude? Submission? I am not some damsel who needs rescuing by a man who thinks he owns the world. He moved toward me then, closing the distance in 3 strides, and I held my ground even though my pulse spiked. When he spoke, his voice was low, dangerously quiet. I do not want your submission. I want you alive. I have lost people to this life, people I cared about, people I failed to protect because I hesitated or miscalculated or trusted the wrong person. I will not lose you. Not because of your father's mistakes. Not because of some rival's power play. Not for any reason. Do you understand me? The raw edge in his voice stopped me cold. I stared up at him, seeing past the control, past the armor, to something wounded and fierce beneath. He was not doing this for strategy or reputation. He was doing this because he could not bear to lose someone else. The realization cracked something open inside me. I will go insane if I have to stay locked up here with nothing to do, I said quietly, my anger deflating into exhaustion. Then we will find something for you to do. But you stay here, you stay safe. His eyes held mine, unyielding, and I knew there would be no negotiating this. I nodded, the fight draining out of me, and he stepped back, his shoulders relaxing just slightly. We stood there in the morning light, 2 people bound together by danger and circumstance, and I wondered how long I could survive in his world before it swallowed me whole. The first day bled into the second, then the third, and I fell into an uneasy rhythm within the walls of Dante's penthouse. I learned the sounds of his world, the low hum of voices in the early morning as men arrived to brief him, the click of his phone as he answered calls in clipped Italian, the way his footsteps moved through the apartment with purpose and certainty. I watched him from the periphery, careful not to intrude but unable to stop myself from noticing. He rose before dawn, always dressed in dark tailored suits that made him look like he was armored for battle, and he worked from a study lined with books and screens, his focus absolute. People deferred to him, their respect tinged with something sharper, something closer to fear. He commanded loyalty without raising his voice, a single look enough to send men twice his size into action. I saw the strategy in everything he did, the careful calculation, the way he anticipated moves before they were made. But I also saw the moments when he thought no one was looking, when his shoulders sagged just slightly and his eyes went distant, staring out at the city as if searching for something he had lost a long time ago. It was in those moments that I glimpsed the loneliness, the weight he carried alone, and it made my chest tighten in a way I did not want to examine too closely. On the 4th evening, he found me in the kitchen attempting to make dinner, a small rebellion against the staff who had been bringing me meals, like I was an invalid. He paused in the doorway, surprise flickering across his face, and then he stepped inside and rolled up his sleeves without a word, moving to help me chop vegetables. We worked in silence for a while, the domesticity of it strange and soothing, and then he opened a bottle of wine and poured 2 glasses. We ate at the long dining table that could have seated 12, just the 2 of us at one end, and the conversation started cautiously, surface-level questions about favorite foods and cities we had never visited. But as the wine softened the edges, I found myself asking the question that had been circling my mind for days. Why do you care what happens to me? You could have just warned me and walked away. You did not have to take me in, protect me like this. Why does it matter to you? He set his glass down slowly, his fingers tracing the rim, and for a long moment he did not answer. When he finally looked at me, his gaze was heavy, weighted with something I could not name. Because I have seen what happens when people like you get caught in the crossfire of people like me. I have watched innocence get destroyed because someone powerful decided it was acceptable collateral. And I decided a long time ago that I would not be the kind of man who allows that, not if I can stop it. His words were careful, measured, but his eyes told a different story, one that lingered on my face, traced the line of my jaw, held me in a way that made my pulse quicken. He did not say more, and I did not push, but the air between us shifted, charged with something unspoken and undeniable, and I realized that whatever this was, it had stopped being just about protection. I was in the kitchen the next morning, nursing coffee and staring out at the city stretching endlessly below, when I heard the front door open and voices spill into the foyer. Dante's voice, clipped and commanding, and another man's, deeper, urgent, in a way that made my shoulders tense. I set down my cup and moved toward the sound, curiosity overriding caution, and found Dante standing with a man I had seen before, the one from the kitchen days ago. Luca, I remembered Dante calling him. They both turned when I appeared, and Dante's expression shifted, a flash of something protective crossing his face before he masked it. Luca nodded at me, respectful but assessing, and then looked back at Dante. Constantine is pushing. He wants a meeting tomorrow night, neutral ground. He says he is willing to negotiate terms. Dante's jaw tightened, and I saw the calculations running behind his eyes, the strategic mind weighing risks and possibilities. I stepped closer, my heart kicking up. A meeting? About me? About the debt? Dante glanced at me, then back at Luca. We will discuss this privately. No. I moved forward, planting myself between them. No more private discussions about my life while I sit in another room like a child. If there is a meeting about me, I am going to be there. Dante's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to that dangerously calm tone I had learned to recognize. Absolutely not. You will not be anywhere near Constantine. This is not negotiable. I felt anger flare hot in my chest, the frustration of days spent powerless bubbling over. You do not get to decide that. This is my life, my father's debt, my risk. I have a right to face the people who are threatening me, to hear what they have to say, to be part of whatever deal you are making. Hiding me away like I am fragile or helpless only makes me feel more trapped. Dante stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, but I held my ground. You do not understand what you are asking. Constantine is not a man who respects courage or honesty. He will see you as weakness, as leverage, and he will use that against me. Then you will have to make sure he does not get the chance. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. But I am not staying here while you negotiate my fate without me. I will not be a passive piece in this. Luca cleared his throat softly, and Dante shot him a look that could have cut steel, but Luca spoke anyway. She has a point. If she is there, Constantine sees she is under your direct protection, that she is not some random pawn he can target without consequence. It might actually strengthen your position. Dante turned back to me, conflict warring in his eyes, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled, a slow, controlled release of frustration. If you come, you do exactly as I say. You stay by my side. You do not speak unless I tell you to. And if anything goes wrong, you follow Luca out immediately without question. Do you understand? I nodded, relief flooding through me even as my pulse raced with the reality of what I had just demanded. I understand. He held my gaze a moment longer, something like resignation mixed with reluctant respect flickering across his face. And then he turned back to Luca. Set it up. Tomorrow night. And make sure our people are in place. I want every angle covered. Luca nodded and left, and I stood there with Dante in the quiet aftermath, knowing I had just crossed a line into his world that I could not uncross, and wondering if I was brave or simply reckless. The club sat in a part of the city I had never seen, tucked behind iron gates and hedges so tall they swallowed the streetlights. And when Dante's car pulled up to the entrance, I felt my stomach twist with a fear that was sharp and electric. Luca sat in the front seat beside the driver, silent and watchful, and Dante beside me in the back, his hand resting on my knee in a grip that was both reassuring and possessive. Stay close to me, he said quietly as the car stopped, and do not react to anything you see or hear. Constantine will be looking for weakness. Do not give him any. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and followed him out into the cold night air. Inside, the club was all dark wood and leather, low lighting that made shadows pool in corners, and men in expensive suits who looked at us with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. Dante moved through the space like he owned it, his presence commanding immediate deference, and I stayed at his side, hyper-aware of every gaze that landed on me, every whisper that followed in our wake. We were led to a private room in the back, and the moment the door opened, I saw him. Constantine. He sat at the head of a long table flanked by two men who looked like they had been carved from stone, and his eyes found me immediately, cold and assessing in a way that made my skin crawl. He was older than Dante, maybe mid-50s, with silver threaded through dark hair, and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty etched into every line. Dante, he said, his voice smooth and accented. Russian, I thought. And this must be the girl causing all the trouble. Dante's hand found the small of my back, guiding me to a chair beside him, and he sat with a calm that felt dangerous. This is Mira, and she is not trouble. She is under my protection, which makes her untouchable. Constantine smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Protection is such a strong word. I am simply here to collect what is owed. Her father made promises, took money that was not his to spend, and now the debt must be settled. Dante leaned back, his posture relaxed, but his gaze lethal. The debt was $30,000 3 years ago. I am offering you $50,000 to close it and walk away. Constantine waved a hand dismissively. Money is not the issue. This is about principle, about respect. Her father disrespected my associate, and now his daughter pays the price. I want her handed over, a symbolic gesture that debts in my territory are not forgotten. The room went silent, the air thick with tension, and I felt my pulse hammering so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Dante did not move, did not blink, but when he spoke his voice was ice and steel. That will never happen. Constantine's smile vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper. Then we have nothing more to discuss. He stood, his men rising with him, and he looked at me one last time, his gaze lingering in a way that made my blood run cold. You should have stayed out of sight, little girl. Now you have made this personal. Dante rose slowly, his hands still on my back, and his voice cut through the room like a blade. If you touch her, if you so much as look at her again, I will burn everything you have built to the ground. Constantine laughed, low and dangerous, and walked out, leaving the threat hanging in the air like smoke. The drive back to the penthouse was suffocating silence, the kind that pressed against my ribs and made breathing feel like work. Dante stared out the window, his jaw set in a line so hard I thought it might crack, and I could feel the fury radiating off him in waves, cold and controlled, but no less destructive for its restraint. Luca sat up front, quiet, and when we pulled into the underground garage, Dante was out of the car before it fully stopped, striding toward the elevator with a violence in his movements that made me flinch. I followed because I did not know what else to do. my mind still replaying Constantine's words, the way he had looked at me like I was already his, and by the time we reached the penthouse I could not stay silent anymore. "Dante," I started, but he held up a hand, his back to me, and I watched his shoulders rise and fall with a breath he was using to leash something dangerous. "Let me go." My voice was quiet but steady, and he turned slowly, his eyes finding mine with an intensity that stole the air from the room. "If I disappear, if I leave the city, go somewhere he cannot find me, this ends. You do not have to risk your people, your organization, over a debt that is not even yours. Let me go, and this is over." His expression did not change, but something flickered in his gaze, something like disbelief, mixed with anger. And when he spoke, his voice was low and lethal. "You think I would let you walk out into the world alone with Constantine hunting you? You think I brought you here, kept you safe, just to hand you over to a life on the run or worse?" I stepped closer, frustration and fear tangling together in my chest. "I am trying to give you an out. I am the problem here, the reason this is escalating. If I remove myself, then you can go back to your life, your business, without a war hanging over your head. Why are you fighting so hard for someone you barely know?" He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hand catching my chin and tilting my face up so I had no choice but to meet his eyes, and what I saw there made my breath catch. "Because you matter," he said, his voice rough, stripped of its usual control. "Because the moment I saw you on that bus drawing hearts on the window like the world had not already tried to break you, I knew you were something I could not walk away from. You remind me of something I thought I lost a long time ago, something human, something worth protecting. I have spent years building walls, making choices that turned me into someone I barely recognize, and then you appeared and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to care about more than power and survival. So no, Mira, I will not let you go. I will not let you sacrifice yourself because you think you are not worth the fight. You are worth every risk, every consequence, and I will burn Constantine's world to ash before I let him touch you." My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy, his words sinking into me like heat, like truth, and I realized with a clarity that was both terrifying and inevitable that I believed him, that somewhere along the way I had stopped seeing him as a threat and started seeing him as the only safe place I had left. I fell asleep that night with his words still echoing in my head, curled in the guest room bed that suddenly felt too large and too cold, and when the sound jolted me awake hours later, I thought at first it was a dream, some phantom noise my anxious mind had conjured. But then I heard it again, sharp and unmistakable, the crack of something breaking, and my heart kicked into a rhythm so fast it hurt. I sat up, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone on the nightstand, and before I could unlock it, the lights in the penthouse cut out, plunging everything into a darkness so complete I could not see my own hand in front of my face. Panic surged through me, hot and suffocating, and I scrambled out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor as I moved toward the door, trying to remember the layout, trying not to make a sound. I heard voices then, low and urgent, coming from somewhere deeper in the penthouse, and the unmistakable sound of movement, heavy, footsteps that did not belong. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I pressed myself against the wall, my mind racing through every terrible possibility, every nightmare scenario I had tried not to imagine. The door to my room flew open, and I bit back a scream, but then I saw him, Dante, his silhouette filling the doorway, and relief hit me so hard my knees almost gave out. "Stay here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but I grabbed his arm before he could turn away. "What is happening?" I asked, and he looked at me for a beat, his jaw tight, his eyes hard. "Constantine sent men. They breached the lower security, but Luca has it contained. Stay in this room and do not come out until I come back for you." He left before I could argue, and I stood there in the darkness, every second stretching into an eternity, my ears straining for sounds that would tell me he was safe, that this was not about to go horribly wrong. I heard more noise, A shout, something heavy hitting the floor, and then silence, thick and oppressive, and I could not stand it anymore. I opened the door and moved into the hallway, my heart pounding, my hands trembling, and when I reached the main room, I saw the aftermath. Two men on the floor, unconscious or worse, and Dante standing over them with Luca at his side, both of them breathing hard, and the moment Dante saw me, his expression shifted from cold control to something fiercer, almost anguished. "I told you to stay in the room," he said, crossing to me in 3 strides, his hands finding my shoulders, and I realized I was shaking, my whole body trembling with adrenaline and fear I had been holding back. "I could not," I whispered, and then suddenly I was against his chest, his arms wrapping around me, solid and warm and real, and I let myself break just a little, let the terror I had been swallowing rise to the surface. He held me tighter, one hand moving to the back of my head, his touch gentle in a way that contrasted with the violence still hanging in the air, and I felt something shift between us, some final barrier crumbling under the weight of what we had just survived. "You are safe," he murmured into my hair, his voice rough, and I tilted my head back to look at him, my breath catching at the intensity in his eyes, the way he was looking at me like I was something precious he had almost lost. I did not think, did not hesitate. I just reached up and pulled his face down to mine, and when our lips met, it was not gentle. It was desperate and fierce and full of everything we had been holding back. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than fear. I felt alive. We left before dawn, the city still wrapped in the gray half-light that made everything look unreal, and I sat in the passenger seat of Dante's car, watching the buildings thin and disappear as we drove further from everything familiar, from the penthouse that had become a cage, and then a refuge, and now a target. He did not tell me where we were going, just that it was secure, that Constantine would not find us there. And I did not ask because the exhaustion had finally caught up with me, the adrenaline crash leaving me hollow and strangely numb. The safe house was an hour outside the city, tucked into woods so dense they swallowed the road, and when we pulled up to the modern structure of glass and stone, I felt the isolation settle over me like a weight, heavy but not entirely unwelcome. Dante's 2 guards took positions outside, their presence both reassuring and a reminder that danger was still circling, still waiting. And when Dante led me inside, I was struck by how different this place felt from the penthouse, smaller, warmer, intimate, in a way that made my pulse quicken. He showed me to a bedroom with wide windows overlooking the trees, told me to rest, but I could not imagine sleeping, could not imagine closing my eyes and letting the world fade when everything felt so uncertain, so fragile. Instead, I found him in the main room hours later, standing by the window with a glass of something amber in his hand, and when he turned to look at me, the exhaustion in his face mirrored my own, the weight of too many decisions, too much violence, too much at stake. "We should talk," I said, and he nodded, gesturing to the couch, and we sat with a careful distance between us that felt both necessary and unbearable. "Tell me about your past," I said quietly, because I needed to understand him, needed to see beyond the control and the power to whatever had made him this way. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the glass in his hands, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, stripped of its usual command. "I was 16 when my father was killed," he said. "He ran the organization before me, built it from nothing, and his enemies thought his death would destroy everything he had created. They were wrong. I took over, learned fast, made examples of anyone who thought I was too young or too weak, and by the time I was 20, I had more power than my father ever did. But it cost me everything else. Friends, family, any chance at a normal life. I became what I needed to be to survive, and somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to want something other than control." He looked at me then, his eyes dark and searching. Until you. I felt my throat tighten, the vulnerability in his words hitting me harder than any threat Constantine had made, and I reached out without thinking, my hand covering his. I told him about my father, about the years after his death, when I had felt so alone, I thought the loneliness might consume me, about the diner shifts and the empty apartment, and the hearts I drew on windows because it was the only way I knew to remind myself that softness still existed. We talked until the sun set and the room filled with shadows, and when he finally moved closer, his hand finding my face, I did not pull away. The days blurred together in the safe house, each one bleeding into the next with a strange timelessness that came from being cut off from the world, and I found myself hyper-aware of every moment Dante was near, the way his hand would brush mine when he passed me a cup of coffee in the morning, the way his eyes would linger on my face when he thought I was not looking, the way the air seemed to thicken whenever we were alone in a room. I caught myself watching him too, studying the line of his jaw when he was lost in thought, the way his shoulders carried tension even when he tried to appear relaxed, the rare moments when his expression softened and I glimpsed the man beneath the armor he wore so carefully. It was dangerous, this pull between us, dangerous and inevitable, and I knew we were both feeling it, both trying to resist something that grew stronger every hour. One evening after dinner, I found him on the deck outside, the forest around us alive with night sounds, and when I stepped out to join him, he turned to me with an expression I could not read, something between hunger and hesitation. "You should go back inside," he said quietly, but there was no force behind the words, no real command, and I moved closer instead of retreating. "Why?" I asked, and he exhaled, his hand coming up to run through his hair in a gesture of frustration I had learned meant he was fighting himself. "Because I'm trying very hard to do the right thing here, Mira, and you are making it impossible." I felt my pulse quicken, felt the electricity that always sparked between us intensify, until it was almost unbearable. "What if I do not want you to do the right thing?" I said, and the look he gave me then was so intense it stole my breath. "You do not know what you are saying." "I do," I told him, stepping close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I know exactly what I am saying." He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides like he was physically restraining himself. And then something broke, some final thread of control snapping, and he closed the distance between us in one swift movement, his hands framing my face as his mouth found mine. The kiss was nothing like the desperate collision after the attack. This was slower, deeper, deliberate, and I felt it in every nerve ending, every cell in my body coming alive under his touch. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I let myself sink into him, let myself forget every reason this was complicated and dangerous and wrong. But then he pulled back, his breathing ragged, his forehead resting against mine. "We cannot do this," he said, and I heard the conflict in his voice, the war between what he wanted and what he thought he should do. "This complicates everything." "Everything is already complicated," I whispered. His eyes searched mine, dark and troubled. "You deserve better than this, better than me, better than a life where you have to hide and look over your shoulder and wonder if today is the day it all falls apart." "Maybe," I said, my hands finding his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath my palm. "But I am already in this world, Dante. I am already in your world, and I choose you. I choose this." The words hung between us in the darkness, and I watched something shift in his eyes, watched the last of his resistance crumble as he pulled me close again, his mouth finding mine with a hunger that made my knees weak. And this time there was no hesitation, no pulling back, just the two of us finally giving in to what had been building since that first moment on the bus when he drew a heart behind mine. He lifted me easily, carrying me inside to his room, and I felt the world narrow to just his hands on my skin, his breath against my neck, the way he whispered my name like a prayer and a curse all at once. And when we finally came together, it was with an intensity that felt like both a beginning and a surrender, like we were sealing something irreversible between us. Afterward, we lay tangled in his sheets, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt safe, truly safe. Not because of the guards outside or the isolated location, but because of the man holding me, because of the connection we had forged through fear and trust, and this undeniable pull that refused to be ignored. "I love you," he said quietly into the darkness, and the words landed in my chest like a physical thing, heavy and precious and terrifying. "I know," I whispered back, because I did know, had known for a while even if neither of us had been brave enough to say it. The next 3 days passed in a haze of stolen moments and deepening intimacy, mornings waking up in his arms, nights falling asleep to the sound of his heartbeat, and I felt myself transforming into someone who could exist in his world, someone stronger than the exhausted waitress who drew hearts on foggy windows. But on the fourth morning Luca arrived, his expression grim, and I knew before he spoke that the fragile peace we had found was about to shatter. "Constantine issued an ultimatum," Luca said, glancing between us with barely concealed concern. "He wants Mira surrendered by the end of the week, or he is declaring open war, and he has allies, Dante, enough to make this very bloody." I felt Dante's entire body go rigid beside me, felt the shift from lover to lethal strategist happen in an instant. "How many allies?" Dante asked, his voice cold and clinical. "4 families confirmed. Maybe more waiting to see which way this tips," Luca replied. "He is painting this as a matter of respect, saying if you break protocol over one woman, then none of the old agreements mean anything." Dante stood, pacing to the window, his jaw tight. "Let him come then," he said flatly. "I am not handing her over, and anyone who thinks they can take her will learn exactly what that costs." I watched him transform fully into the man who had built an empire on ruthlessness and control, and while part of me was still afraid, another part recognized that this was who he had to be to survive, to protect what was his, to protect me. Luca nodded and left to mobilize their forces, and when Dante turned back to me, his eyes were dark with promise and threat. "This ends now," he said. "One way or another." I listened to Dante and Luca strategize for the next 2 hours, watched them move pieces on a mental chessboard I was only beginning to understand, talking about alliances and weak points and tactical advantages, and with every minute that passed I felt the weight of it settling heavier on my chest, the knowledge that men would die because of me, because Constantine wanted to make an example and Dante refused to let him have what he wanted. When Luca finally left to coordinate with their forces, I stood abruptly, my hands trembling with a cocktail of fear and determination that made my voice shake when I spoke. "There is another option," I said, and Dante turned to me with eyes that had gone cold and distant, the strategist still in control. "No," he said flatly, like he already knew what I was going to suggest. "You have not even heard what I am going to say." "I do not need to," he replied, moving closer with predatory grace that would have frightened me weeks ago, but now just made me angry. "You are going to suggest turning yourself in, offering yourself to Constantine to end this before it becomes a war, and the answer is no." "It would work, though," I insisted, hating how my voice cracked but pushing forward anyway. "He wants me. If I go to him willingly, he has no reason to come after you or your people, no reason to drag 4 other families into this." Dante's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek, and when he spoke his voice was deadly quiet. "You think I would let you walk into that? Let you sacrifice yourself like your life means nothing? Like you are just a problem to be solved?" "I am the problem," I shot back. "My father's debt, my existence, that is what started this." He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides, his hands gripping my shoulders hard enough to ground me. You are not a problem. You are not collateral. You are not a sacrifice I am willing to make. Do you understand me? I felt tears burn behind my eyes, felt the enormity of what he was risking crash over me. People are going to die, Dante. Your people, because you will not let me go. Then they die, he said with a finality that was both terrifying and absolute. But you do not, and that is not negotiable. I stared at him, at the ruthless determination in his face, the complete lack of compromise, and for the first time, I saw fully what he was capable of. The cold calculation that had built his empire, the willingness to burn everything down before surrendering what he considered his. It should have frightened me. It did not. Instead, I felt something else, a fierce trust in his ability to do exactly what he promised, to end Constantine permanently and protect me in the process. You are going to kill him, I said, not a question, but a statement. Yes, Dante replied without hesitation. And anyone else who thinks they can use you against me. I will send a message that will last a generation. I searched his eyes, looking for doubt or regret, and finding neither. Just granite resolve and something darker, something that whispered of violence barely leashed. Okay, I said quietly. Then tell me how I can help. The plan took shape over the next 18 hours, and I watched Dante transform into something both mesmerizing and terrifying, a general orchestrating a battle with precision that left no room for error or mercy. He spread maps across the dining table, marked locations with red ink, made calls in languages I did not understand, and through it all his focus never wavered, every decision calculated to bring Constantine exactly where he wanted him. The core strategy was elegant in its simplicity: leak false information through a source Constantine trusted, make him believe I would be moved to a secondary location outside the city with minimal security. Let his arrogance convince him this was his opportunity to take me without engaging Dante's full forces. Luca questioned whether Constantine would take the bait, whether he would see through the trap, but Dante shook his head with cold certainty. He will come, Dante said. His ego will not allow him to pass up what looks like my mistake, and he will want to prove he can take what is mine. I listened to them debate entry points and response times, watched Dante account for every variable with a thoroughness that revealed just how dangerous he truly was. And when he finally looked at me, his eyes held a question he had not yet voiced. I need you there, he said quietly, and the room went silent. Luca started to protest, but Dante cut him off with a gesture. Constantine will not move unless he believes she is actually there, unless his scouts confirm her presence, which means Mira needs to be visible at the location until he commits his forces. It is too dangerous, Luca argued, his usual composure cracking. If anything goes wrong, if the timing is off by even 30 seconds, she is exposed. I know the risks, Dante replied, his gaze still locked on mine. Which is why I am asking her, not telling her. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat, felt the weight of what he was proposing settle over me like a physical thing. You want me to be bait? I said, and he nodded slowly. For approximately 4 minutes you will be in a structure we control, visible through windows we have strategically chosen, and the moment Constantine's vehicles enter the perimeter, you will be moved to a reinforced safe room in the center of the building. But yes, for those 4 minutes you will be exposed, and I will not lie to you about that danger. I should have been terrified. Part of me was, but another part, the part that had been growing stronger since the night I called him from my violated apartment, recognized this as a choice, a moment where I could reclaim agency in a situation that had stripped it away. If I do this, if it works, it ends, I said. He comes for me and you end him. Yes, Dante confirmed. I looked at Luca, at his clear disapproval, then back at Dante, at the man who had turned my world inside out, and somehow made me feel more alive than I had in years. "Tell me exactly what I need to do," I said, and watched something like pride flash in Dante's eyes before he pulled me close and began explaining the details that might save or destroy us both. The decoy location was an abandoned warehouse on the industrial edge of the city, all rusted metal and broken windows that Dante's team had transformed in 36 hours into a convincing temporary shelter, complete with generator lights and surveillance equipment that would read as authentic to Constantine's scouts. I arrived 90 minutes before the expected window, driven in an unmarked car with Luca at the wheel and Dante silent beside me, his hand wrapped around mine with a grip that betrayed tension his face refused to show. Inside, the building smelled of rust and old concrete, and I counted 8 of Dante's men positioned at strategic points, all armed, all watching me with expressions that ranged from concern to barely concealed disapproval of my presence here. Dante walked me through the route 3 times, from the visible room where I would stand near the window to the reinforced safe room 40 feet away, making me memorize every step, every turn, every second it would take. "When scouts are confirmed, you move," he said, his hands framing my face. "You do not hesitate. You do not look back. You run like your life depends on it, because it does." I nodded, my mouth dry, and he kissed me hard, a desperate, possessive thing that tasted like fear beneath the control. Then he left to join his team in the shadows, and I was alone in a room with 2 windows and a folding chair, watching the sun sink lower and feeling my heartbeat count down the minutes. The scouts appeared at 6:47, 2 men in a dark sedan circling the block twice before parking across the street, and I stood where Dante had positioned me, visible, but not obvious, a figure moving past the window like someone unaware of being watched. My hands shook, and I pressed them against my thighs, forced myself to breathe slowly, reminded myself that Dante had planned for every contingency. The sedan left after 11 minutes, and I knew they were reporting back, confirming the target was in place. Then came the waiting, 40 minutes that stretched like hours while I stood in that room with muscles coiled and ready to run. The signal came through the earpiece Dante had insisted I wear, Luca's voice calm and clinical. 3 vehicles approaching from the east. Estimate 90 seconds to perimeter breach. I moved to the window one last time, let myself be seen, and watched as the first black SUV rounded the corner with 2 more behind it, moving fast with the confidence of predators who thought they had found easy prey. Then Dante's voice in my ear, low and absolute. "Move now." I ran, my footsteps echoing in the empty space as I heard the vehicles screech to a halt outside, heard car doors slam and voices shouting commands. I hit the safe room door and spun the lock closed just as the building erupted with sound, Dante's team emerging from concealment and surrounding Constantine's forces in a perfectly executed pincer movement that left no avenue of escape. Through the reinforced walls I heard Dante's voice, amplified and cold. "You came for what is mine, Constantine. Now we discuss terms." The standoff lasted 14 minutes that felt suspended outside of time, and from my position in the safe room, I could hear nothing but muffled voices and the thunder of my own heartbeat until Luca opened the door and told me it was finished. Constantine had agreed to terms and was leaving with his men. I emerged into the warehouse to find Dante standing in the center of the space with an expression carved from stone, watching through the window as the 3 black SUVs retreated into the gathering darkness. And when his eyes found mine, something in his posture finally relaxed, though his jaw remained tight with residual tension. "It is done," he said as I reached him, and I wanted to feel pure relief, but instead, I felt something more complicated, a knot of gratitude and exhaustion, and lingering fear that would not quite release its grip. We returned to the penthouse in silence, Dante's hand wrapped around mine in the back of the car while Luca drove, and the city lights blurred past the windows like a world I was no longer sure I belonged to. Once inside, Dante poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. And I watched him from across the room, this man who had upended my entire existence and somehow made me feel safer than I had ever felt, even as danger swirled around us both. "Is it really over?" I asked, and he turned to face me with eyes that held truths he was weighing whether to speak. "The immediate threat is neutralized," he said carefully. "Constantine is pragmatic above all else, and he knows that coming after you again would cost him more than his pride is worth. But men like him do not forget perceived slights, and there will always be a part of him that resents being outmaneuvered. So I will never be truly safe," I said, and it was not quite a question. "You will be as safe as I can make you," Dante replied, "and my reputation will serve as a shield because everyone in this world knows what it costs to touch what is mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened me, but instead, it sent heat curling through my chest, and I crossed the space between us until I stood close enough to see the exhaustion etched around his eyes. "Thank you," I said softly, "for protecting me, for risking your people, for caring when you had no reason to." He set down his glass and cupped my face in both hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones with a gentleness that contradicted everything I had witnessed him capable of. "I had every reason," he said, and then he kissed me with a desperate intensity that tasted like relief and fear, and something deeper that neither of us had dared name. When we finally broke apart, I rested my forehead against his and asked the question that had been building since the moment I ran from that warehouse. What happens now? Where do we go from here, when the crisis that brought us together is gone? He pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, and I saw uncertainty there for the first time, a vulnerability that made him somehow more real. "That depends on what you want," he said. "You are free now, truly free, and I will not keep you in this world if you want to leave it." The question hung between us like smoke, and I stepped back from his embrace because I needed space to think clearly without the gravitational pull of his presence distorting everything I felt. I walked to the windows and stared out at the city spread below like a carpet of lights, each one representing a life that continued in blissful ignorance of underworld negotiations and armed standoffs, and the cost of falling in love with a man whose name carried weight in rooms I had never known existed. My old life waited for me somewhere out there, my studio apartment with its leaking faucet and second-hand furniture, the diner where I served coffee to construction workers and wrote down orders on grease-stained pads, the bus route I rode twice daily while drawing hearts on foggy windows and dreaming of something more, without knowing what shape that more might take. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now, a girl who thought her biggest problems were overdue bills and loneliness, who had no idea that her father's mistakes would one day pull her into a world where men negotiated with violence and protection was a commodity more valuable than gold. I could go back to it, I knew that. Dante would make sure I had enough money to start fresh somewhere new, a different city maybe where no one knew my name or my history, where I could serve coffee and ride buses and be safe in my small, unremarkable existence. The thought should have brought relief, but instead it sat in my chest like lead, heavy and cold and wrong. I turned to find Dante watching me with an expression that tried for neutrality, but failed to hide the fear underneath. And I realized he thought I was going to leave, that he was bracing himself for the loss, even as he offered me the choice. "How do I go back?" I asked quietly, "when everything that used to fill my days feels empty now? When I close my eyes and see your face instead of counting down hours until my shift ends?" He moved toward me but stopped halfway, giving me space, even as I saw his hands flex at his sides with the effort of restraint. "I cannot promise you safety," he said, his voice rough with honesty. "I cannot give you normal or simple or easy, and there will always be a part of this world that follows me no matter how far I try to walk from it." "I know," I said, And I did know, had seen enough in these past weeks to understand exactly what staying would mean. But when I imagine leaving, going back to serving coffee and riding the bus alone and drawing hearts that no one answers, it feels like suffocating. The confession hung in the air between us, and I watched something shift in his expression, hope warring with fear and guilt. "You deserve more than what I can give you," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Maybe," I replied, walking toward him until only inches separated us. "But what I want is you, and I think maybe I have been waiting for you since the first night you drew that heart back to mine." The words left my mouth and hung in the air between us like a vow, and I watched Dante's expression shift through a dozen emotions in the space of a heartbeat before settling on something that looked like wonder, mixed with fear, as though he could not quite believe I was choosing him, choosing this life with its shadows and dangers and unspoken rules that would now become the architecture of my existence. "I am not naive," I said, stepping closer until my hands rested against his chest and I could feel his heart thundering beneath my palms. "I know what your world looks like. I have seen the violence and the tension and the way men look at you with either loyalty or fear. And I understand that staying means accepting all of it, the good and the terrible, the safety you provide, and the danger that will always circle us because of who you are." His hands came up to cover mine, pressing them harder against his chest, as though he needed me to feel the proof of his racing pulse. "You could have a normal life," he said. And I heard the conflict in his voice, the part of him that wanted to protect me even from himself. "You could find someone who comes home at 5 and worries about mortgages instead of territory disputes, someone who has never had blood on his hands or enemies who wait for weakness." "I know," I replied, holding his gaze so he could see the certainty in my eyes. "But I do not want normal if it means hollow, and I do not want safe if it means alone. And when I imagine my future now, the only version that feels real is the one where you are in it." Something broke in his expression then, the careful control he maintained slipping enough for me to see the raw need underneath, the loneliness that matched my own, and the desperate hope that maybe we could build something real despite the impossibility of our circumstances. "I have never wanted anything the way I want a future with you," he said, his voice rough and low and stripped of every defense. "I have built an empire and commanded loyalty and taken what I needed without hesitation. But you are the first thing that has ever felt like it could save me, instead of just sustain me." The confession settled into my bones like warmth, and I rose on my toes to kiss him softly, a promise, instead of passion. "Then let me stay," I whispered against his mouth. "Let me choose you, and this complicated, dangerous, beautiful thing we are building, and we will figure out the rest as we go." He pulled me tight against him then, his arms wrapping around me with a fierceness that spoke of possession and protection and relief, and I felt him exhale as though he had been holding his breath since the moment he offered me the choice to leave. "We will make this work," he said into my hair. "It will not be easy, and there will be moments when you question this decision, but I swear I will spend every day proving you were right to trust me." "I believe you," I said, and I did, because despite everything I had learned about his capacity for ruthlessness, I had also seen his capacity for care, the way he protected what was his with unwavering determination and treated loyalty as sacred. The first weeks of our new reality unfolded in layers, each day revealing another facet of what it meant to build a life together, when one of us commanded an empire that operated in shadows, and the other was learning to navigate a world where loyalty was currency and trust was earned through fire. I moved my few belongings from the apartment I would never return to, boxing up the remnants of my old life and feeling surprisingly little nostalgia for the cramped space and peeling paint, because what I had thought was independence had really been isolation, and what I had mistaken for safety had been nothing more than ignorance of the dangers that existed whether I acknowledged them or not. Dante gave me space in his world, never pushing but always present, and I watched him move through his days with the precision of someone who had learned that hesitation could cost lives, taking meetings in his study with men who spoke in careful codes, reviewing reports that detailed shipments and territories and negotiations I was only beginning to understand. But he also made room for softness, for mornings where we shared coffee and he asked about my sleep, for evenings where he came home and found me first before attending to business, for moments when the weight of his responsibilities lifted enough that I could see the man underneath the reputation. I asked him one night what he wanted beyond survival and power, and he had looked at me with surprise, as though no one had ever posed the question. And after a long silence, he said he wanted to build something legitimate, something his future children could inherit without shame, and the admission felt like a gift. He began including me in discussions about the businesses he was expanding, restaurants and real estate and security firms that operated above board, and I found myself drawn into the strategy of it, offering perspectives he said were valuable because I saw opportunities where he saw only risk management. I learned names and faces, the hierarchy of his organization, and the delicate balance of respect and fear that kept it functioning. And though some of the men were skeptical of my presence at first, Dante made clear I was not temporary, not a distraction, and his word carried enough weight that skepticism became acceptance. We navigated the strange territory between danger and domesticity, nights where he came home tense from conflicts I only half understood, followed by quiet dinners where we talked about ordinary things, plans for renovating one of his properties or books I was reading, or memories from before our worlds collided. Trust deepened with each day, each choice to be honest about fears and hopes, each moment when he could have held information back but chose transparency instead. Love solidified into something I could count on, no longer the desperate attraction born from proximity and danger, but a steady certainty that we were building something real. One evening, I stood at the window of our bedroom, watching rain streak the glass, and remembering another window on another night, when I had drawn hearts without knowing anyone was watching, and on impulse I lifted my finger and traced a heart in the condensation. I felt him approach before I heard him, his presence a warmth at my back, and then his hand reached past mine and drew a heart beside it, our fingers touching briefly before he wrapped his arms around me and pulled me close, and I leaned back into his chest, feeling something I had not felt in years. Home. Months have passed since that night on the bus, when I drew hearts on foggy glass without knowing someone was watching, without understanding that such a small, unconscious gesture would become the thread fate used to stitch my life to his. And now, when I look back on that version of myself, tired and lonely and moving through days that blurred together in gray sameness, I barely recognize her because the woman I have become is stronger and softer all at once, forged by danger and gentled by love in ways I never imagined possible. The spring morning light filters through the windows of the penthouse, our penthouse now, and I stand in the kitchen making coffee while Dante reviews reports at the table, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his reading glasses perched on his nose, in a way that makes him look almost ordinary, except for the tension in his shoulders that never fully leaves, the awareness of threats and opportunities that defines his existence. Luca will arrive soon for their weekly strategy meeting, and later I have lunch scheduled with Elena, the wife of one of Dante's captains, a woman who has become an unexpected friend and guide to navigating this world where loyalty is everything and appearances matter more than I initially understood. My role has evolved beyond what either of us expected, not just as Dante's partner, but as someone the organization has come to respect. Someone whose insights into the legitimate businesses have proven valuable and whose presence has softened some of the hard edges of men who live by codes written in blood and tradition. Danger still exists, threats that surface and are handled with efficiency. I do not always witness but always know about. Because Dante promised transparency, and he keeps his promises, and I promised not to flinch from the truth of what his protection costs. Constantine has kept his distance, his pragmatism outweighing his pride, though Dante assures me the man neither forgives nor forgets, and we live with that knowledge the way we live with all uncertain futures, prepared but not paralyzed, careful but not cowed. I have found purpose in ways that surprise me, working alongside Dante to expand the legal ventures that will someday eclipse the Shadow Empire, building something his children, our children, can inherit without the weight of blood debts and territorial wars. And when I voice ideas in meetings, now the men listen, because Dante has made clear I am not decoration, but partner. The diner feels like another lifetime, that exhausted woman serving coffee and counting tips, and going home to an empty apartment where danger was invisible but no less real. And though I sometimes miss the simplicity, I do not miss the loneliness, the feeling that I was drifting through a life that was happening to me, rather than one I was actively creating. We face challenges together now, Dante and I and the family we have built from his trusted circle, people who would bleed for each other and often have, and I understand finally what it means to belong, to be seen and chosen and protected, not because I am weak, but because I am valued. Last night I drew a heart on the bathroom mirror after my shower, steam fogging the glass the way cold fogged that bus window months ago. And this morning I found Dante had drawn one back beside it, along with words in his precise handwriting, mine always, and I traced the letters with my fingertip, feeling the truth of them settle into my bones. I am no longer afraid of what tomorrow brings because I know I will not face it alone, no longer uncertain of my place because I have found home in the most unexpected person. And when I think about fate and chance and the randomness of a late-night bus route, I cannot help but believe some connections are written in the stars, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The hearts on the window were not accident, but destiny. Two lonely souls reaching out in the dark and finding each other against all odds and logic. And now I stand in morning light with coffee warming my hands, and the man I love just steps away, and I know with absolute certainty that I am exactly where I am meant to be.